Hello, friends. Good evening. It's good to be again back here, and it's time to heal seminars. We are delighted today to have Scott Ritsema, who is an educator, a writer, a speaker. He has devoted over 10 years, which I was talking recently with him, that's about his interest in sharing and what he knows about how media affects the brain. And it's a very interesting topic. I think it affects all of us. I know it affects me. Maybe a little addiction there to checking WhatsApp and things all the time. And so, Scott, thank you for making time. You're in Michigan. It's late there. It's 10 o'clock. But thank you for making the time. And we want to give you as much time as possible to learn from you. So we give you the time, and you are free to share if you want your PowerPoint, and we are here ready to learn.
Thank you for having me. And we'll go right to the full slide there. What you're going to hear this evening is taken from the Media Mind, Reclaiming the Human Soul in the Digital Dark Age. This is the sequel to the original Media on the Brain seminar that we have been doing now. So I can't believe it, since 2012. But what are we dealing with in this one? I want to begin with the first media device ever invented, first electronic media device ever invented. This is, of course, the telegraph. Samuel Morse text message, the first text message in human history in the year 1844. And the words he texted were, "What hath God wrought?" Which I find to be helpful because we're using media right now, right? And it can be a blessing, a positive thing. In his framework, theologically, that was a blessing from the divine. And also at the same time, we see it's a double-edged sword, don't we? So many problems with the media use issues we are facing, and especially our young people, child development, maldevelopment, mental health disruptions that we're going to be walking through this evening. But just to set the stage with that, I appreciate it. I think we all do. And it's an important disclaimer. It goes without saying, but it's worth saying that media is a tool and it can be used as a positive good. But between the years of 2012, when we first started tracking media use problems, and just 4 years later, the percentage of Americans who had 5 hours or more of screen time per day doubled. So we saw these numbers catastrophically rising, astronomically rising, and we couldn't believe what we were seeing. We said, well, we got to start building a new seminar on media, especially 2018. This one just kind of was an attention grabbing, headline grabbing. Minutes of media per day for the average American in 2018 was 666 minutes. I know a lot of your listeners have the biblical thoughts of prophecy there. I guess this is just a coincidence, but that's also just a large number. That's a lot of minutes of media per day. It starts to take its toll on us physiologically, first of all. When we assume the position and we're leaning forward, hunching forward like this, there's 49 pounds of pressure being put on the upper spine when you're at a 45-degree angle. Over time, that's going to take its toll. When we slouch and we're seated or standing in a slouch position, we have a lower sense of confidence, self-worth, more pessimistic outlook. When you're standing, sitting straight, tall, it improves mood, it improves confidence. You have less depressed, fearful, pessimistic words and thoughts. Pretty neat. When you're in a slouch position in an academic setting, lower quality academic performance versus that higher performance in cognitive tasks. No surprise there. Part of it has to do with our breathing. When we have full respiration, oxygenation of the blood, the brain's going to function better. Also, at the same time, it's just the mental focus. It's the mindset that we have when we're in certain postures and positions. Digestion can be hampered by slouched positions and you're crunching up all the digestive organs. So taking a good walk after eating, making sure we get breaks from our media use, and try to have that good posture. Just a couple of minor tips. But I guess in general, as you watch the guy walking down the alley, we're kind of checked out, aren't we? Yeah, he went right down there into the, oh man, I don't want to laugh. Poor guy, I hope he's okay. But he's on his phone, walks right through the barrier. I won't make you watch it again. I think we can sum it up with the media mind is checked out. I mean, that's just the state of society today. But from the Christian viewpoint, at least, the mind of Christ, or whatever religious viewpoint anybody's coming from, a renewed, a redeemed, transformed, not so the way the culture is taking us. When you make choices to recapture and reclaim your own brain, your own mind, and that of your children, the mind of Christ is engaged. It's time to learn to be human again. We're all human beings. What does it mean to be human? We now touch, tap, and swipe our devices 2,617 times per day. Well, I don't know if we touch real things that much, like our children and our pets, and I don't know, wooden nails or soil and plants or cooking implements. The real three-dimensional, non-virtual living is giving way to more and more and more and more of the virtual, of the screen-based everything, it seems now. And that makes us ask questions. What does it mean to be human socially, spiritually? As far as our occupation and creative arts and you name it, the purpose in life, is it entertainment and stimulation on the digital device? Well, maybe when we get online, we're having some kind of social benefit. This is the most socially connected generation in history, we've been called by promoters of social media, the big tech companies. But if that's the case, why was there before COVID a cuddling with strangers craze? This was a real thing. People were actually hiring professional cuddlers to service them in this way of just snuggling and cuddling to feel love, or people who are weirded out by that concept. Lonely? This chair will hug you back. So maybe if it's a loneliness epidemic, the Surgeon General said, maybe, just maybe, social media is not fulfilling us socially. We're the most socially connected generation in history, but we've become the most lonely generation in history. This was before COVID. Before distancing ourselves socially and virtual everything being online. It was going that direction more and more. And the more we have online only friends, the more we have online only engagement with people, the more lonely we are. And that's borne out in the research. The media mind is lonely, but the mind of Christ fulfilled. The way that God has designed us to be is to be connected in families, in friendships, in communities, human to human, person to person, to have eye contact, physical touch, the real thing. University of Pennsylvania did a study where there was a study done, and also in Denmark as well, similar studies. Let's take 1 week and take young adults off social media, or down to 30 minutes a day in the Pennsylvania study. And they found that loneliness scores dropped 36% when you do that. When you bring them down to 0 in the case of Denmark, 0 minutes of social media per day, you get loneliness dropping dramatically. So maybe we should call social media anti-social media. Maybe it has its purpose and function. I happen to have an account. We promote our ministry on there. So I wouldn't say everybody's got to get off of all digital devices. We're on them right now, utilizing them as tools, right? But if it's a social life, if it's 9 hours of entertainment and social media per day, we are getting out of hand, out of line. By the way, parents, we look at the teens and we're like, oh, kids these days. Parents are doing almost 8 hours of social media and entertainment media per day, spending twice as much time just on Netflix than all quality time with their children combined. So the big question we all ask ourselves is, what could I do differently? What kind of new set of lenses could I look at life through to see if things start happening better socially, spiritually, mental health, physiologically, everything? You try a new set of lenses at the doctor's office when he puts that on and he goes, which one's clearer, 1 or 2, right? And you thought you were seeing fine coming in, but you learned 2 is more clear than 1 was. We don't always know it, until we try, like that 7 days in those 2 research studies that I mentioned. Another aspect of the media mind is when we're using blue light at night, and particularly young people having sleep disruptions and tiredness in school the next day, instead of the frequencies of light that are more dull, more orange in color, like fireside and like the setting sun, which solicits to the brain to produce melatonin, and then we get a good night's sleep. Well, the blue light at night makes the media mind tired, but the mind of Christ is energized. Now, this starts from a very early age, sadly. We're putting these kids in the iPad activity seat from newborn to toddler. Newborns. Now, this American Academy of Pediatrics said, please no media before age 2. World Health Organization said the less, the better before age 5. But here we go from day 1, from newborns. And then when they're toddlers, of course, they got to learn to use the potty. What better interface than iPotty for iPad to learn how to be human again? Come on now. To learn to use the potty using a video game interface to incentivize everything. Then they're inducted into video game addiction from the earliest ages. This is a fantastic book by Dr. Nicholas Kardaras, author of Glow Kids. He says, we now know that those iPads, smartphones, and Xboxes are a form of digital drug. Recent brain imaging research is showing that these games affect the brain's frontal cortex, which controls executive functioning in exactly the same way that cocaine does. So it's an addictive thing, but not just that. Video games are a diagnosable addiction now in the psychiatry community. In Diagnostics and Statistical Manual, I think edition 5 it is, that it's an addiction, but not just that. When you're talking addiction, you're talking about affecting the prefrontal cortex, which controls executive functioning, impulse control, all of those important aspects of our human experience, especially for our kids. Your kid's brain on Minecraft looks like a brain on drugs, he says. No wonder we have a hard time peeling kids from their screens and find our little ones agitated when their screen time is interrupted. Ask any parent, describe the withdrawal symptoms of an addict, and then describe what happens when you take your kids' video games away. And you're talking about the same thing. How about attention span? We all want to have a better attention span, particularly for our young people. Time Magazine, you now have a shorter attention span than a goldfish. They pointed out 9 seconds is the average. They say goldfish attention span, human beings, 8 seconds. Well, make of that what you will. But the creator's answer to this is nature. When we are out in nature, we're surrounded by greenery, we get our attention spans lengthening. Or just looking at fish in a fish tank. But if they put kids in an urban-centered type of playground that isn't surrounded by greenery, then you don't get as much benefit from attention span increases from the urban concrete jungle, so to speak. So those urban kids, really, we got to get them some nature exposure as the underprivileged communities, particularly. The media mind is distractible. The mind of Christ, attentive. So executive function we mentioned a moment ago is where the prefrontal cortex pays attention. So it's not just about attention span, though. It also helps us regulate our emotions and impulses, exercise wise judgment and planning, and then have what the biblical Christian perspective would call the fruit of the Spirit, or you just call self-regulation in psychology, self-control. So that's something that every single person wants more of. We want a stronger prefrontal cortex so we can just have more control over ourselves, wise judgment, planning, etc. And our young people, we want them less out of control. Less media will help with that. Now, in the social media generation, Gene Twenge published the book, The Narcissism Epidemic. San Diego State University researcher, living in the age of entitlement, how the social media generation is becoming so narcissistic, the most narcissistic generation ever recorded. But then also feeling inadequate. This was just a news headline, but it points out surveys that people who are more engaged and addicted to social media feel less good about themselves, inadequacy and insecurity. Now you might say, well, aren't those two opposite things? Narcissism and insecurity. Well, they're not really opposites. They're two sides of the same coin. In fact, you might say the narcissist is quite insecure, but let's say hypothetically, the narcissist is just full of themselves that they really think they are the greatest thing. And insecurity means, oh, I'm low self-worth and self-loathing and all of these unhealthy dynamics. Those are two sides of the same coin of focus on self. Instead of focus on altruistic thoughts, empathetic thoughts, outward thoughts, it turns the attention on self, both of these two. So the media mind will become one or both of those, but the mind of Christ can be secure. When you realize your value is that you are a human being, you are made in God's image. Your worth, your value is not measured by likes. It's not measured by people's response to you on social media. So when we help our young people realize that they are just loved, because they just are, you are, and therefore you are loved. And when you're valued and have these relationships, it's like the Father and the Son scenario in the Gospels. You are my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And this is why it's so diabolical when you get Facebook advertising executives in there, and these were leaked documents out of Australia a number of years ago. It was a big scandal. It didn't really make enough of our news headlines, I don't think, but they were bragging to advertisers. We actually know how to identify our young users when they're feeling especially vulnerable, and we can target we can pitch your product, your whatever, your commercial at these young people when they're feeling insecure and worthless, because that's when they're the most vulnerable. This was actually a founding president of Facebook, Sean Parker, who was apologizing about how they built the platform to exploit the human vulnerabilities, or what he called vulnerabilities in human psychology. By the way, you got to hear him, and you got to hear the other Facebook executive. They're in our trailer for the Media Mind. If you email me, I'll send you the trailers, or just send you the videos of the Media Mind so you can watch all of it. We're just doing some abbreviated content tonight. send me an email, scottritsema@gmail.com, or you can go to our website and use the contact form there. You'll hear Sean Parker, I'll send you the video clips where they are just, you can hear their regret of having built and set up these platforms and the problems that it's caused, particularly for young people, that Jean Twenge points out. She's author also of the book iGen, and she points out big problems among the young people today. Like the Wall Street Journal said, most teens prefer to chat online. It's actually 2/3 of teens say that if I'm going to communicate with my friends, these are my friends, the people I love and care about, I'll just chat with them. I don't need to see them. Why do I need to be with them? I'll just chat with them on Snapchat or whatever app. It's the era of the robotic moment, as Sherry Turkle at MIT calls it, where we're really phasing out human relationships. We are roboticizing human relationships. And then all of a sudden you hear talk about social robots. Really, social robots? Yeah, because our children are lacking EQ. They don't have empathy and the language of facial expressions and bodily gestures and all of these things. So we got to have empathy taught by AI. I mean, how ironic, how really depressing is that? What does this world come to when we've got robots to tell preschoolers stories? Because the adults in their life, we're all too busy. Shame on us. Former Facebook executive said, he's another one in the clips that I was mentioning, I feel tremendous guilt for what I helped to make. He said, we are destroying how society works. We are ripping apart the social fabric of how society works. That's pretty strong language. The answer to this, again, is in nature. When you take kids out of Los Angeles, fifth graders, half of them were left in school and to play their video games and whatnot all evening as their normal routine in the city. The other half of the fifth graders were taken out into nature to a camp where they do archery and hiking and team building exercise and so on. And it was only a 5-day experience, but they wanted to see how can 5 days of this human contact and contact with nature, how can those 5 days improve their emotional health, their emotional intelligence? It was an EQ test. And they found just 5 days in nature begins to already improve their emotional intelligence, their ability to read emotions in others, identify, empathize, and have sociability, eye contact, all these aspects of really what is central to what it means to be human. The media mind, yes, it's becoming more and more disconnected. But when we go back to doing things, in my view, the creator's way, we can become more affectionate, we can become more loving. Now, the real sad tragedy of this, I'm sure you've all heard about this, is after holding steady for decades, immediately after the advent of social media, teen suicide rose by 70% in just 10 years. Among age 10 to 14, the rate went up 133%. Can you believe that? I mean, I've never heard of that age group even. 133% increase. And among the 12 to 14-year-old girls, suicide was up threefold during this era of the rollout of social media. That's not a coincidence that you can identify. Jean Twenge points out the advent of social media, boom, this happened, this happened, this happened. Massive, dramatic changes that never happened historically in generational. Generational changes happen slowly, gradually, over time. The iGen, boom, social media hits them and it changes them for the worse in so many ways. Why are more American teenagers than ever suffering from severe anxiety? American Psychological Association survey shows teen stress rivals that of adults. Between 2010 and 2016, there was a 60% increase in depression. And that's not diagnoses, that's just surveys. So this is objective, demographically controlled, using the diagnostic criteria for depression if one were to be seeking mental health help. 60% rise in just 6 years. I've worked with over 1,000 teens in the past 15 years, and I've observed that students who have been raised on a high-tech diet not only appear to struggle more with attention and focus, but also seem to suffer from an adolescent malaise that appears to be a direct byproduct of their digital immersion. Indeed, over 200 peer-reviewed studies point to screen time correlating to increased ADHD, screen addiction, increased aggression, depression, anxiety, even psychosis. And that's why Sean Parker, when he was doing his apology tour, he said, God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains. And I think these big tech executives do know. Apple CEO Tim Cook said, I don't want my nephew on a social media platform at all. He doesn't have children, but he cares about his nephew. Steve Jobs, his kids never used the iPad. Bill Gates' kids only limited their time to 45 minutes per day of internet use for productive, edifying purposes. So what do they know that the rest of us don't know? Well, the reality is the media mind is becoming more and more dysfunctional the more and more we plug in. But the mind of Christ, balanced and well, it's time to heal, a time to heal, right? More research says Facebook can cause depression, this time among millennials. So it's not just the teens, which we were just covering, it's the young adults as well. Mental health issues increased significantly in young adults during that decade of social media. The media mind, depressed, anxious, stressed, but the mind of Christ, content, joyful, and peaceful. Those are some of the fruits of the Spirit. When you take the young adults off of social media, not only do you reduce loneliness, but you reduce depression 33% as well. Just 1 week of no social media, depression drops 33%. Now back to the younger kids. 3/4 of UK children today spend less time outdoors than prison inmates. And nature is the antidote to all of these problems of overuse of media, wrong times of the day, wrong purposes, frequency of use too frequent, dopamine hits, getting addicted, or just long uses and total quantity of time being too much. All the mental health issues, all the addiction, all the deficits in social connection, emotional intelligence is cured by people and nature. I mean, that is so simple. But they're getting less time outdoors than prison inmates. It's like we've built for ourselves and our children a virtual prison. We're going to see the last child in the woods. I guess that's a little hyperbole, of course, in the title, but not by much. He cites a survey that was done where the majority of 11-year-olds have never climbed a tree before in their entire life till age 11. I thought every kid by age 11, when I was a kid in the 80s, I mean, every kid had climbed a tree by age 11. This is not the case anymore. The majority have never climbed a tree, and nature exposure being so important for mental health. Kids are spending twice as much time just playing video games than all outdoor activities of any kind combined. So just video games, that's not even all the other media. And all outdoor activity combined, 2-to-1, the gaming to the nature. Kids raised with screens were almost universally what I like to call uninterested and uninteresting. He's treated and worked with thousands of teens. Bored and boring. They lacked a natural curiosity and a sense of wonder and imagination that non-screen kids seem to have. They didn't know or care to know about what was happening around them in the world. All that seemed to drive them was a perpetual need to be stimulated and entertained by their digital devices. A sad commentary indeed. The media mind is becoming more bored and more boring, but the mind of Christ, curious and inquisitive, it hungers and thirsts for knowledge. The media mind is immersed in the counterfeit reality, but the mind of Christ is awake to the wonders of God's reality. The media mind is enclosed in that virtual prison, but the mind of Christ is fully alive. That's some good news there. Now, this is a really interesting book, Reset Your Child's Brain, a 4-week plan to end meltdowns, raise grades, and boost social skills by reversing the effects of electronic screen time, by Dr. Victoria Dunkley, a practicing psychiatrist. And she's got an alternative prescription that she treats hundreds of children with previously diagnosed disorders with. So these kids come to her, children and adolescents. They come with every diagnosed named thing in the book. There's just a few examples of some of the worst and most prevalent issues facing our children. And what she does is she puts them on a prescription similar to that of the big tech people in Silicon Valley, who their kids are at the low tech schools. They're like, please, no media till middle school at the Waldorf School of the Peninsula. That's how they do it. Her prescription is a 100% media abstinence for 3 weeks. You might say that seems extreme. Well, that's how all these tech gurus in Silicon Valley, the most sought after private school in Silicon Valley is the Waldorf School, where they don't do screens till middle school. And they have these contracts with their nannies. There were whole New York Times exposés on this, looking at the very people who are the developers, building the apps, making the platforms that are getting us and our children hooked and dividing us from one another. They are super strict because they know how phones work and they don't want their children anywhere near them, to quote the New York Times. So she said, well, why don't we just try treating kids with this and see what happens? Because maybe there's a whole bunch of debate over what's the cause of all the mental health disruptions. Well, let's try this, and maybe I can identify the cause by providing the solution. Hypothetical solution so far, what were the results? The results are 80% of these young people have the majority of their symptoms disappear in 3 weeks, or the name of the book is 4 weeks, because it's a 4-week plan, but most of them are done with it in 3 weeks. Just let that number sink in there. 80% of the young people with previously diagnosed disorders have the majority of their symptoms disappear in 3 weeks. 50% have all their symptoms disappear. I mean, you're not allowed to call that a cure, because I know you have your disclaimer. We're not diagnosing, treating, or curing anything. But what do you call it when all of the symptoms are gone, and half of these kids in 3 weeks just by taking the media away? That's amazing. Screen time, she says, is a contributing factor to virtually all of the children she has treated. Now, maybe you knew this all intuitively, but there it is in an actual clinical setting. I began prescribing video game restriction with startling results. I observed how the vast majority of children exhibited certain symptoms surrounding gameplay, symptoms strikingly similar to amphetamine exposure, that resolved in the days or weeks of complete abstention. Their development would grow by leaps and bounds when screens were most restricted. So we keep hearing this. It's like your kid's brain on Minecraft looks like a brain on drugs. Chinese researchers call it digital heroin. Dr. Peter Wybrow at the University of UCLA, he's in the neuroscience department there. He talks about it as electronic cocaine. There's a guy at the Pentagon who works in addiction research with the young adults there in the Navy, addiction, video game addicts. He says this stuff is digital heroin. It is digital pharmakia is his term for it. And so we keep hearing these things, but you know it in the research, you know it in the clinical manuals, diagnostic, in the World Health Organization also. Amphetamine, it's a stimulant. She also points out in the book, it functions very much like a stimulant, like cocaine, amphetamines, etc. The media mind is definitely not well, but as you see in Dr. Dunkley's practice, the mind of Christ is healing. And no matter what religious perspective you're coming from, everybody wants that healing. Everybody wants that for our young people, for our children, for all of us. Now, what's the path forward? The path forward cannot be to follow the crowd, because that's taken us to where we are here. And why do I have these two cards on the screen? If you've never heard of the Solomon Asch experiment, I've got to give you a little glimpse into this, because maybe what we've all just been through recently in medical science has made us all just raise our eyebrows and say, something is not right here. I won't go further down that rabbit trail, but you take that for what it's worth. When we follow the crowd, we end up in big trouble. Solomon Asch experiment, 1950s. You have a row. Okay, let's say you're brought into a room, and you're part of an experiment. You're sat in the last seat of a row of 8 people. You don't realize that the 7 people in front of you are actually in on a trick, and you're the only guinea pig. But here you go. The researcher lifts up these 2 cards and says, which line does the one on the left match on the right? Well, that's easy, right? I mean, they make the question so simple that every person will get it right every time, pretty much. And so they've removed any error from the equation so they can just simply test this. What they're going to do is have the 7 people in front of you, and you don't know this, but the 7 people in front of you are going to answer correctly, and then it's your turn. You audibly answer, one guy after the next, one gal after the next, till the guinea pig is, okay, yeah, I agree. Everybody in front of me said it's C. It definitely is C. Well, after they have about a dozen of these, or about 18 of these, and a dozen of them or so were answered correctly, but then they insert some incorrect answers. I got this in my notes. I want to make sure I got that right. Yeah, that's in other notes, but I think it was 18 cards and 12 of them answered correctly. But anyway, how about this? You know this is C, but let's say this set comes up again at a later round, and everybody in front of you answers A. Now you're thinking, well, that doesn't make a difference. The answer is still C. I will say C. But get this, out of those handful of ones that they primed you on with everybody in front of you getting it wrong unanimously, audibly, 75% of person number 8s who would be brought in for this research study would answer wrong with the group. You're thinking, how is that possible? I know, I was shocked by it too. What is it? What was the dynamic at play there? Peer pressure, not wanting to stand out, trying to avoid conflict, you name it. When the researchers actually subsequently interviewed the people who were number 8 and would answer wrong at least some of the time with the group, 75% of person number 8, they did interviews and they said, now, did you realize you were answering those incorrectly? Many of them, a sizable percentage, I don't remember the exact percentage, but some of them said, no, I thought I was answering right. So their eyes were literally playing tricks on them. The rest were just, I just wanted to go along with the crowd. When they were to answer in written form, they did a lot better than when they had to say it out loud. So where do we go in medical practice, in how we raise our children, in how we educate, how we do education reform? Oh boy, that is a passion of mine. Schools, how are we doing things in schools? No matter where our place of influence is in life, what young people we can influence, what professional fields we can influence, following the crowd is not a good plan, particularly when it decouples us from our rational capacity and we have no courage to stand for the right, to do what we know is right, and to call for what we know is right. Now there's this one. This one's a little more well-known. You're probably familiar with the Stanley Milgram experiment. This is the
Scott, sorry, you want to go back to the full screen?
Yes. Here we go. The Milgram experiment, also the same post-World War II era. This was after the Nazis carried out atrocities that made historians and social commentators and critics wonder how in the world could somebody be shoving innocent people into gas chambers and doing the Holocaust. What a horrific thing. Who are these heartless human beings? Well, psychologists were puzzled. They wanted to understand the dynamic. And for this one, they wanted to test the impact of authority. So the first one that I showed you with the cards, that was about conformity, decoupling our reason. This one is about authority, negating our conscience. And it went like this. The guinea pig is called the teacher, and he's brought in and told, you're going to be using an innovative teaching method of electroshock punishment of a student on the other side of this wall. On the other side of the wall, he will be taking quiz questions, and when he gets one wrong, you are to shock him, to teach him to do better. Now, the experimenter is there in the white lab coat at a position of authority. He's the scientist, right? I mean, you follow the scientist, you do what you're told. He is the knowledgeable one. He has the authority. And he says, the man across there's nobody actually being shocked, by the way. The man on the other side of the room has just gotten an answer incorrect. Please apply shock level 1. Bzz, and you shock him, and you hear the guy respond. There's no actual person being shocked, but okay, he just got another one wrong. Increase the voltage, please, and shock again. Okay, are you sure you want me to do that? Okay. Bzz, now his screams and protests increase each time. They subsequently ask for further voltage increases. Eventually, the knobs and the labels on the little machine there are listing it as potentially lethal. And you're thinking, there's no way people are going to hit that. My friends, people would be banging on the other side of this wall saying, please let me out, tape recordings of people screaming with terror. And the knob is labeled potentially lethal. 2/3 of people would still go and hit that button to shock the person, because the scientists would simply say it is imperative that the experiment continue. So where do we go in our lives? Hopefully we don't simply follow the crowd or simply follow governing bodies or authoritative voices or whomever they may be out there telling us not to do what's right, or telling us that black is white, up is down, 2 + 2 is 5. It's an Orwellian world we live in. But I think we can all overcome the mental health problems that we've covered in this and find healing, and also find the courage to stand out and to say no, to do what's right and speak the truth, no matter the consequences. Authority, conformity, they have their place. You know, we're community-minded people. We want to get along. That's important. Positions of authority are important in life. Don't mean to cast aside all group dynamics and all authoritative structures of order in a civil society. But when those things negate reason and conscience, we're in big trouble. And maybe that's happened in the social media era. with big tech, with our child rearing or lack thereof, our outsourcing of our parenting to schools and screens. Maybe the home needs a rebirth. Maybe this thing about the ultimate social problem in our society that's behind all the social problems, from gang violence to suicidal ideations to self-harm to promiscuity, drug use, crime, delinquency, you name it. Every social problem has the same causal foundation, and that is the fatherless home, the broken homes of our land. How can we restore that? How can we bring back the humanity and the nature that we've been speaking of again and again, that can bring so much peace, that can bring so much joy, that can bring childhood as we've understood it for thousands of years, childhood of joy, childhood of friendship, of mentorship. The media mind is indeed bringing us into a digital dark age of sorts. We could talk about literacy and intelligence and IQ in addition to EQ, but mostly tonight we've been looking at mental health. And so as we wrap up and go to some questions, I just leave you with the hope that there is a better way. And you can just turn back the clock a bit and say, you know, maybe some traditional ways of doing things and not the virtual everything will give us a well-positioned way forward for our young people.
Thank you, Scott. That was amazing. I have the first edition, the Media on the Brain. I have to get the new one. So very interesting, all these studies. I'm sure the media affects adults as well, because the brain is the brain. So most of us, we have probably WhatsApp or one of those to connect. We have emails, maybe Facebooks. I know you have an email account, email address, which I will share in a moment if people want to write to you any questions. So how do you handle, what do you recommend? When do we check WhatsApp? How, you know, I won't say it's impossible not to have this media. It's almost, you know, especially, for example, WhatsApp. Facebook, maybe, you know, you can avoid it more. For Instagram, people, you know, for businesses, you know, they promote. So if you don't mind me asking, what do you do, what you don't do, what you recommend? You know, how do we manage all these possibilities?
As far as work is concerned, I really liked the recommendation of this young man, Charlie Kirk. And if his politics aren't your bag, that's neither here nor there. But he's a big name in the political world. But he was doing a Q&A, and some young people were asking him. He's always been an advocate for college campuses and stuff. And they asked him about social media and TikTok and stuff like that. He just launched into it. He's like, it's diabolical and it's all that. And one thing he recommended was, he said, I understand, and he's not coming at this from any religious perspective that I know of, you know, general, you know, Judeo-Christian, biblical kind of foundations of America stuff. But he said, biblically, the seventh-day Sabbath, Friday night to Saturday night, is a time where I completely, he's not Jewish, he's just, that's, you know, for Christians and any human being. I mean, if you go back to Adam and you look at the creation account there, it was the seventh day of the week. Charlie Kirk says, I am completely unavailable from people who want to get a hold of me on, you name it, WhatsApp, email, Facebook, Snapchat, whatever. And so as far as work is concerned, you can really build a lot of balance. And there is good research on a Sabbath observance and the mental health benefits. And not just that, but the productivity boost you get, that you can get more done, more productive, not just more productivity, but more net production done when you have proper balance in your life. I just finished listening to a book. I like media. I use Audible. It's called Deep Work. And the author was talking about having a time of the day where you shut it off as well. Because if you're working on projects, you're trying to get things done, then having an evening where you just, okay, this task, this task, this task, and this task are getting moved to the morning. And I have some hours in the evening to decompress, to have a little break. And then in the morning, I'm back at it with more vigor and more freshness. As far as the throughout the day is concerned, if things are non-essential notifications, like your social media, whatever, for most people, just turn those notifications off. And then they're not bing, bing, bing all day. And you go to the platform at the time where you need to be in control of getting some things done on there. Those are just some practical tips that some people have done to try to get a hold on these things. It's like a ball and chain, you know, I'm constantly responding to everything. My favorite button on my phone, this is a tool for me, is I will have this with me quite quite a lot. I mean, some people are hardcore. They're like, you remember the old days where the phone was on the hook? You remember the hook?
Yes,
And
yes,
if it was off the hook, it would make that terrible noise. The people are like, hey, just create a hook, put it in the back office, put it in the closet, I mean, wherever. And you go use the internet, you go make the phone calls, respond to the text at a set time of the day. This is actually how my wife does it as a homeschool mom. I have it with me, but say I'm with the kids, I don't want to be do all the time, because then you're missing eye contact and like all the things I preach about, right? So I put it in airplane mode. Airplane mode is one of my favorite buttons on the phone. So then when it's time to use it, when I have a few minutes and I'm working, then I take it out, respond to all the texts at that time. And people know, with me at least, don't expect to hear back, that minute. We're not going to sit there and have a conversation on text back and forth for 20 minutes. Like, you know what, if we need to get back and forth like that, we'll set up a time to have a phone call. Or you'll hear back from me later on text, and when people know that that's the case. And I know that's tough with business and stuff. If you want to be on the ball, then maybe you make some compromises on that and you do what needs to be done to get the job done. But have those set times, times of the day, times of the week where it's tech free and you can take a breather. That's going to be very good for mental health.
Mm-hmm. I am a dentist myself, and sometimes I check in between patients WhatsApp or see what's message, and sometimes I turn it off, and it's a different morning. It's a different thing. It's the brain it slows down. You're more calm than when you're with anxiety of checking who wrote or answering emails. And sometimes it's kind of needed, but I think it's a lot of that's an endorphin that you get when you see this person sent me a message. It's really an addiction. I struggle with that. I try to minimize the time, but it is a fight. That I know that adults, we are affected as well.
Yeah, and you're right on with the endorphins. When we were talking about the addictive aspects, Sean Parker said, when we built these platforms, we knew we were going to give them a little dopamine hit and here and here and here to keep them on a platform, to keep them contributing content, and that was their business model. And so that's a deliberate thing, and they've designed it that way. And so it's pretty much impossible to use these devices in the way that they're designed to be used, where you just go hook, line, and sinker and following the current of the river they're taking you on. It's impossible to do that without having some mental health hit to us. And so when we take control, we'll reduce that or eliminate that entirely. We can utilize them as tools instead of being used by them. But the fact of the matter is, you were mentioning about how it feels more calm and peaceful and thoughtful. The more we're on these platforms with all these messages going back and forth, particularly the social media, it's a stress. It increases stress and cortisol release in our bodies, which of course reduces prefrontal cortex, and it's that whole dynamic and that cycle that affects our mental health as well.
So for children, I don't know, 2, 4, 5, 8, 10. We know the video games, that's also is addictive. Now, what about watching a movie or a documentary? So what do you guys recommend? Like 30 minutes a day?
I like that you just moved right on past video games and you basically just dropped a super radical bomb on folks. And I loved it. And I agree. Like, what are video games for? There is no positive function of video games in the life of a child. It is a plug-in drug. It is addictive. It is not helpful. It is only harmful to their development. It's the biggest offender of all in Dr. Dunkley's assessment in her practice of that we were discussing earlier. So yeah, if we can just say bye to video games, and you might say, well, that's never going to be the law of the land, and we don't need to even be concerned about that so much. But the law in my home is video games have never been a part and will never be a part of it. And when kids understand that and they have such a happy life because they have their parents' attention, they have fun, they have games, they have books, they have music, they have projects, they have tractors they're working on, they're chopping wood, climbing trees, catching frogs and fish, you name it. They just love life. They don't miss video games. It's so anyway, moving on to your other question was about more reasonable uses and forms of media. The most harmful media for child development is the more stimulating, the more overstimulating, the more hyperstimulating it is, the more it reduces attention span, reduces prefrontal cortex development. And so if you're mentioning a documentary, to me, it's not as much about the time or frequency, the length or the frequency of it, as the stimulant level of it. If you were to do 30 minutes a day of a super high stimulant cartoon, like SpongeBob, versus, may I say, boring, relatively boring, documentary for 2 hours a day, I'll take the documentary, even though it's 4 times as long. In fact, here's an interesting fact about that. When you do 30 minutes of video gaming in the evening before bedtime, a child, 30 minutes of video game is equivalent to 2 hours of television in the amount of sleep disruption that it achieves. So, and that's television like SpongeBob and exciting, entertainment that they're viewing. So video games, most hyper stimulating, and then you got regular television, then you got more slow paced. Basically, you know how we were talking about nature. If our media mimics nature, then we're doing really well. Mm-hmm. In other words, it needs to be nature paced. I used to say slow paced and boring. I just said that word. We don't use that word in my household because life is not boring. What is boredom? Boredom didn't used to exist before the Industrial Revolution. You can't find it in the history of the English language, in literature. We were occupied. We had things to do, places to go, people to see. We were productive. We had hobbies. We had interests. We had political, theological discussions at the foundation of the Republic. People were reading the Federalist Papers, super high level academic stuff. The average farmer is reading that. So anyway, before the Industrial Revolution, boredom is not really a part of the equation. It comes in, especially in the media era. The more media we have, the more boredom we have. So we need to go back to that nature-paced living. And as much as possible, the more quiet and simple the life of the child, the more free from artificial excitement and the more in harmony with nature, the better it is for their spiritual development, their intellectual, cognitive development, and most of all, their emotional and social health, as we learn to love each other, love God, that whole spiritual nature that we were made for. So I like that idea, and I wouldn't set an amount of times a week or a time on it. I'd more get to the issue of, is it nature paced or as close to that as we can get?
Fantastic. Okay, so it's not the length. Obviously, we don't want to waste 2 hours unless it's a good documentary. But
it's got to be good. Yeah.
If it's the pace of the program, that's the problem.
Yeah, and of course it's true, right? I mean, is it teaching them good things? I've moved away from the theatrical Hollywood style entertainment. It just has a frame of reference change that's so fast, and the dramatic elements just kind of turn off prefrontal cortex, engage the limbic system more. It alters brainwave frequency. And so, that, I think when you mention documentary, you're on the right track. And then informative, informational, true, all of those things you got to bring into the equation. Also, if we can do it together, that's good. It's not a babysitter. A lot of these Silicon Valley people that were interviewed for that, expose that I was talking about earlier, they will say, we'll watch something together as a family once a week. And that's just something that is a special event, and it's a togetherness. We used to do that as a family when I was a kid. It was a movie, but it was the Disney Sunday night movies. We'd be watching those together every week. I don't necessarily recommend that. I have some interesting things to share about Disney sometimes, but anyway, I think you're right on it.
All right, fantastic. I don't know if there is any question from the viewers. You guys can either text it or unmute yourself. No, there is another question. I'm really intrigued in your new series, and very fascinating information that you have presented today, Scott. So, but we want to thank you once again for your time, for what you have shared. Let me share my screen. I would like to show the viewers. Here we are. This is Scott's email. Sorry, let me put his email. There we go. So if you have any questions, and also you have seen Bells of Truth Ministries .org, that's his website, and a lot of good information, books, videos, a lot of excellent information. So before we say one more time, thanks to Scott, I would like to invite all of you for November 9th. This will be the last meeting of the year. And Laura Parra, she was with us a few months ago. Sorry, she will be talking, it's not a media mind, I'm sorry, I need to correct that. It will be talking about how we overcome childhood pain, the things that maybe happened to us in childhood, how we can overcome that. I apologize for the confusion there. And since we are here and we have Scott, Would you mind, Scott, closing with a prayer for us as we finish?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you so much that you have the plans to prosper and to not harm, to give a hope and a future. And we know that our young people are close to your heart. Jesus said, let the little children come to me. And we don't want to hinder them. We want them to see the love of God in us and the adults in their lives. And so I just pray that you give us the courage to say what is true and to do and act accordingly and to follow conscience and what is right, irrespective of what those around us may be telling us ought to be done. And so I just pray for wisdom and for balance and the right approach on how to move forward and find your will for us. We know you satisfy the desire of every living thing. You open your hand, and at your right hand are pleasures evermore, the Bible says. So may we walk in that light and find the joy of living as you designed for us, how to be human again. Help us to have our souls reclaimed in this digital dark age. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you again, Scott. Thank you for your time. Thank you, all the viewers, for being with us. We hope to see you in November. Have a good evening. Thank you very much.